All right, can everyone hear me? So my name's Aline. I'm a research scientist at Aptos Labs, and today I want to tell you about our work on sensibly-anonymous payments without zkSNARKs. This is joint work with a bunch of my collaborators from VMware Research, Aditya Bhatt, Benny Applebaum, Itai Avram, Guy Guetta, Benny Pincas, and Avishai Anai. So if I only had one slide for this talk, here's what I would put in it. UTT offers a couple of things. First of all, UTT takes a stance on anonymity and limits it via the so-called idea of anonymity budgets as originally proposed by Sander and Tashma in 1999. So what does this mean? This means that just like in normal systems like Zcash, your transaction does hide the sender, the recipient, and the amount, but only for the first, let's say, $10,000 you send per month. Past that amount, if you want your transaction to stay anonymous, you have to clear it with an auditor. So it's a way of limiting your privacy in order to create some accountability. Second, UTT is a decentralized system. So we actually implemented it in a BFT code base, specifically in VMware's Concord BFT code base. And the Bank of Israel did a CBDC prototype on top of this Concord BFT prototype. And if you want, you can implement UTT in a permissionless BFT, like a proof-of-stake blockchain, but there will be some performance implications. I would also argue that UTT is user-friendly. So if you want to make a payment in UTT, you can just send the money to an email address or a phone number. You don't have to use a clunky 32-byte address, which is very easy to mistype. And you can even send payments to users who haven't registered in the system yet with their phone or email address. And last, UTT offers good performance. So if you want to sign a transaction, that takes 60 milliseconds. To verify a transaction is 34, and the transaction size is 14 kilobytes. So if you compare these numbers to a system like Zcash Orchard, our transaction signing is much faster, our verification is 3 times slower, and our transaction size is 5 kilobytes larger. And while these numbers can be improved, even if they cannot be improved, UTT is very amenable to horizontal scaling via sharding. So we achieve 11,000 transactions per second at half-a-second latency using a Byzantine consistent broadcast technique for those of you who are familiar with that. And lastly, we achieve all of this without using general-purpose zkSNARKs from very simple cryptographic building blocks. So why might you care about this work? I think if you're an academic, there's a couple of reasons. So you might be familiar with the Chaumian eCash line of work. And in that sense, UTT is a new framework for doing Chaumian eCash. And unlike Chaumian eCash, UTT has denominations for the coins. You can have $5 coins, $10 coins. Instead of using blind signatures as a way to do Chaumian eCash, UTT uses re-randomizable signatures, which are much more powerful, as I'll argue later. And of course, UTT has this idea of anonymity budgets that I mentioned earlier. And we have a security proof using a novel MPC framework for reactive functionalities that some of you might find interesting. If you work in industry, then you might like the idea of privacy with limits because of regulatory compliance reasons or because you want to prevent abuse in your system. And you might also like the idea of your users not making mistakes by paying to a phone number. And your users easily recovering their key after losing it because, as I'll show you later, UTT uses MPC-like ideas. And of course, UTT, I argue, is simpler to implement and optimize than zkSNARK-based systems because you don't have to do circuit designs, you don't have to pay thousands of dollars to your auditors to audit your circuit design. And it's very efficient to implement in permission BFT systems. It synergizes very well in that setting. OK, so for the rest of the talk, we'll go over the system overview, the cryptographic preliminaries, and the cryptographic design. So at a high level, there are 3 decentralized actors in UTT. So here I have a user, Alice, and she interacts with a ledger, much like in any blockchain system that you're familiar with. She can send an anonymous transaction here, but only if she has enough anonymity budget. If she runs out of budget, she can ask for more from the auditor at the end of the month. And also, if it's not the end of the month yet, she can send her anonymous transactions to the auditor, revealing the details or some of the details and getting a clearance. But of course, these two ideas don't really work. They don't mesh together because if I'm a malicious user, I can start many separate accounts and get unlimited anonymity budget. So for that, to prevent that Sybil attack, we need a registration authority. And this is where Alice goes and registers and gets a valid proof that she's a valid, let's say, human being. All right, so that's the system overview. Next, we're going to go into cryptographic preliminaries. This is going to get a little bit technical. Put your seatbelt on. The first ingredient that we use is Peterson commitments. So some of you might be familiar with this. For those of you that are not, imagine I have a vector of messages, and I put it in a sealed envelope. That's the metaphor for a commitment. So there's this commitment algorithm that takes the message and some blinding factor R and creates a sealed envelope CM. And the property of the sealed envelope is that it's hiding, meaning it hides what I put in the envelope, and it's binding, meaning that once I gave you the envelope, I cannot change my mind about what is in it. And unlike sealed envelopes that you're all familiar with, these envelopes are a little bit magical, so you can re-randomize an envelope by adding some extra blinding factor here, delta R, and you can get a new envelope using randomness R plus delta R. And the nice thing about these re-randomizable commitments is that the new commitment that I re-randomized and the old one cannot be linked together. In other words, if I gave you a sealed envelope and you re-randomized it and you gave it back to me, I wouldn't be able to tell if this is the same envelope I gave to you earlier. And this will be very important for anonymity. And another property these commitments have, which is a little bit mathematical, is homomorphism. So if I have two commitments to two different messages, m and m prime, I can multiply them together and get a commitment to the sum of m and m prime. And this commitment will use the sum of the randomness. The second ingredient is a re-randomizable signature scheme, which was originally proposed by Poincheval and Sanders in 2016. For the academics in the audience, I really recommend reading this paper. This is a beautiful paper and a beautiful signature scheme, very, very versatile. And unlike every other signature scheme out there, you generate a secret key and a public key or a verification key, and you can sign a message, but in the case of re-randomizable signatures, what you can actually sign are commitments to messages, not the messages themselves. So suppose I have a commitment, I can sign it using the secret key, and I'll add some blinding factor U in there. And even better, suppose I have a re-randomized commitment that I have signed in the past, I can actually re-randomize the signature on that commitment by putting in the same blinding factor that I put in the commitment re-randomization and some extra blinding factor for the signature itself. And then I'll get a signature on the re-randomized commitment. So this is, again, really nice from a privacy perspective, because if I gave you a commitment and a signature, and then you re-randomized both and you gave them back to me, I wouldn't be able to tell if this is the same commitment that I gave you initially with the same signature. And as you'll see, we're going to leverage this idea because our coins will be commitments that will be signed by the ledger. And when the ledger gives me a commitment, I can re-randomize it locally and present it later when I spend that coin. And the ledger won't be able to tell who I am as a result. The third ingredient is that we take this re-randomizable signature and we thresholdize it. This is a particular variant of Poincheval-Sanders proposed in the Coconut paper by Sonino et al. And what is a threshold signature at a high level? Some of you might be very familiar with this. In a threshold signature scheme, I take the secret key of the signature scheme and I split it amongst a bunch of servers such that any subset of T servers can reconstruct the signature, but no less can. And here in this example, I have 4 servers, with one of them being malicious. Any 2 servers can collaborate to sign a commitment, and together they can output the signature on that commitment. Okay. And of course, there's more ingredients, but we don't have enough time. We use very simple zero-knowledge sigma protocols. We use key private identity-based encryption, verifiable random functions, zero-knowledge range proofs, and Byzantine consistent broadcast for sharding. All right, so this gets us into the technical meat of the talk, the actual cryptographic design. There won't be any math in this talk. It'll be just high-level black box usage of the cryptographic primitives. If you want some math, come talk to me after. So let's see how registration works in the system at a very high level. Suppose I'm a user Alice, and I want to register with this registration authority. The authority will have a Poincheval-Sanders key pair. And it'll also have an identity-based encryption key pair for those of you who are familiar. If you're not familiar, don't worry about it. And now suppose this user has an ID, like a Coinbase ID, where Coinbase has already done enough work to verify that this is a human being. The user can present that ID to the registration authority, engage in some fancy schmancy cryptographic protocol that we won't talk about. And at the end of this protocol, what Alice will get is a couple of secrets. One secret will be an IBE decryption key associated with her Coinbase ID. Another one will be a PRF secret S, and then a blinding factor A for a commitment. And the other thing Alice will get is her actual anonymous credential of having succeeded in this protocol. This will consist of a registration commitment, which is a commitment to Alice's identity and her PRF secret, and a signature on this commitment, a re-randomizable signature. And this is what Alice will present in every transaction as proof that she is a valid user that can transact. Okay, so now that we know how you register, let's see what is a coin in our system and how you spend the coin. So a coin has a couple of secrets. It has an owner identifier, so alice.cv.id, like I showed you earlier. It has a coin value, it has a serial number, and a blinding factor R. These are the coin secrets that nobody should learn except Alice, the owner of the coin. And there's a public component of a coin. There's a coin commitment, which commits to Alice's identity, the serial number of the coin, and the value using the blinding factor R, and a signature on this coin from the ledger. This is a re-randomizable signature. And this actually is what an anonymous coin is in our system, this tuple of a commitment and a signature that is re-randomizable, like I told you earlier, in the sense that Alice can pick some extra blinding factor, toss it in there, and get a new commitment and a new signature that is unlinkable from the previous pair. And not only the coins are re-randomizable, so are the registration credentials. They're just a commitment and a signature, like the original coins. So everything is randomizable, and we're going to leverage these ideas when spending the coins in the transaction, as I'm about to show you. So if you want to transfer your coin to Bob, and let's say Bob has identity B, what do? Well, first you present your re-randomized anonymous credential. That's a typo over there. And then you present oh, that's not a typo, sorry. First you present the anonymous coin, which you have re-randomized, and second you present the anonymous credential. And then you add in some proofs and some ciphertexts. So the first part of the proof will be a nullifier, which is a PRF under Alice's secret S, computed over the serial number of the coin. And this is what we will use as the double spending prevention to prevent Alice from using the same commitment signature pair multiple times in different transactions. If Alice were to do such a thing, all of these transactions would have to reveal the same nullifier, and we are going to keep track of all of the spent nullifiers to prevent that. The second thing is a commitment to the identity of the receiver of the coin and the value that they are receiving. So in this case, Bob's identity and value B, which should equal value A. And the third component is a ciphertext encrypting the value and the randomness for this IVCM commitment for Bob using identity-based encryption. So you can see in there that I am using the master public key IPK of the IBE system with Bob's identity, for those of you who are familiar. If you're not familiar, I can just encrypt if I know your email address. That's all you need to know. And lastly, there's a Sigma protocol proof pi, which argues that these things here have been computed correctly so that the serial number, for example, used when deriving the nullifier is indeed the same serial number in the coin commitment. The PRF secret is the same as in the registration commitment. And the IVCM commitment sends the same value as in the original coin. And that defines a transaction, and when the ledger sees this transaction, it can verify it as follows. First, it checks that the registration commitment and the coin commitments are signed using Poincheval-Sanders. Then it checks that this nullifier is not in the list of spent nullifiers to prevent double spends. Then it checks the Sigma protocol proof, which also acts as an implicit transaction signature, because knowledge of the PRF secret S is needed in order to create the Sigma protocol proof. And then once the bank has done this, it knows the transaction is valid, and it can derive the serial number pseudo-randomly from the transaction history. And also it can derive a coin commitment for Bob by homomorphically combining this IVCM from the transaction with a dummy commitment to the derived serial number. And this yields a commitment to Bob's coin. And lastly, it'll sign this commitment, and now we have a tuple. We have a coin commitment for Bob and a signature on that commitment that the bank leaves on the ledger for Bob to pick up. Right, so this will be Bob's anonymous coin. And what Bob will do is he'll take this coin, re-randomize it, and spend it later using the same protocol I just showed you. And of course, Bob will have a couple of coin secrets here, his coin value here, his serial number, which he can pick up from the transaction history as well, because it's derived pseudo-randomly, and the blinding factor RB, which he can decrypt from the ciphertext, together with val B, I should say. All right, so this takes care of transferring one coin fully to Bob, but what if I want to transfer a coin to Bob and also get some change, right? How do I do that? We have to slightly change the transaction format for that. So what we will do is, instead of having just one IVCM for the recipient, we'll have two of them. One of them will be for Bob as before, and another one will be for Alice. And then we'll also have a ciphertext for Alice too, encrypting the value that she gets back as change and the randomness. And now the transaction has to prove a couple of extra things, right? So it has to prove that the value A plus value B is equal to the original spent value in the commitment. And you can do this with zero-knowledge range proofs and by leveraging the Peterson homomorphism very efficiently. This has been done in a bunch of previous work on anonymous payments. And lastly, you have to adjust the sigma protocol proof pi. In particular, you have to prove that I actually don't even remember why that's needed for right now. There's some adjustments there. OK, so now the third part, which was kind of what we started with in the beginning of the talk, was sensible anonymity. So we want anonymity, but anonymity within reason. How do we do that? We limit how much you can spend anonymously based on an anonymity budget. And the way we implement that is by having the auditor entity that we discussed earlier issue anonymous budget coins. So unlike normal coins, budget coins have an expiration date, as you can see here, and they're signed by the auditor, just like normal coins. And you put this in your transaction when you want to spend accountably, and you add some extra output there in the transaction for the budget coin change, because you might have more budget than you're spending coins, and you need to get back some budget coin change. And now you have to adjust the transaction to prove a couple of extra things. First, that the date in the budget coin is not past the current date. Second, that you have more budget than you're giving coins to the recipient, Bob. And third, that you've given yourself the correct budget coin change. And adjusting the sigma protocol proof pi in a way I don't remember. OK, so that basically takes me to the end of my talk. What are some key takeaways that you can take from this? So one key takeaway is that you can prevent abuse and surveillance using anonymity budgets, and you can do this efficiently. You don't have to use complicated zkSNARK proof systems. A second key takeaway is the power of re-randomization. So you can have coins as re-randomizable signed commitments, and this results in a very simple protocol that is very easy to implement. And last, the power of threshold cryptography. You can pay to a phone number using a threshold issuance identity-based encryption protocol, and you can even allow your users to recover their secret key if they lost it. But of course, I should say all of this comes at a cost. In case this wasn't clear yet, we have to have a shared secret amongst the blockchain validators. This requires, in a proof-of-stake setting, solving a weighted secret sharing problem and a distributed key generation problem. So there are overheads. There's a price to pay in permissionless systems. And in BFT systems, doing a DKG can be in permission BFT systems where you have N servers, it's very easy to do DKGs, so the cost there is much lower. I didn't have time to tell you how we scale our system via horizontal scaling with Byzantine consistent broadcast. And there's also a lot to be said about revoking stolen registration credentials, like your PRF secret S and your decryption key, IB decryption key. And there's a bunch of future work that we could do here. One thing that we could do is, because we have the shared secret amongst the blockchain validators, we're in big trouble if the secret is ever compromised, because new coins could be created out of thin air, and we would never find out about it. There would be no way to know. Every coin appears as a valid coin, verifies with a valid signature on it. So to prevent these attacks, one approach that we're thinking of investigating is to make coin issuance transparent, keep a log of issued coins, so as to prevent abuse when the secret key is stolen. And if we were to do this, each transaction would have to prove that they're spending a coin that has been logged in this transparent log. There's a bunch of speedups that we can apply, which we haven't investigated. We can use batch range proofs. We can use better sigma protocols from compressed sigma protocol theory. We can just generally apply batch verification, multi-exponentiations, multi-pairings in our protocol, which we haven't done an excellent job at in our current implementation. And another thing that we can investigate are budget exemptions. So for example, when you go to a pharmacy or a drugstore, you want to perhaps not have to waste your anonymity budget. Every time you buy some drug, you should not have to be, you should be anonymous for free. And if you add enough math, I'll leave you here with a gem I found recently. Thank you so much. I would love some questions.
Thank you, Alain. So maybe we get one question.
Thanks for the great talk, Alain. I have a couple of questions on the budget, right? Do you think it makes sense in some cases to have a private budget? And then could your scheme be extended to do that? And also generally curious on what you think are some other good functions that auditors might want to compute on such systems other than just like a budget.
Good. So two questions, private budget and other accountability mechanisms. So a private, can you say more there? Like how would a private budget work?
Yeah, so in this scheme, my understanding from the talk is that whatever budget a user gets, they know what the budget is. Say it's $10,000.
Sure, yeah.
It's $10,000, but
yeah,
it could make sense perhaps in certain systems for the user to not know that, and could your scheme be extended to that?
Yeah, that's fascinating to ponder. I guess you could do it. It would be more involved because since you don't know the budget, you cannot spend the coin because you cannot open the commitment. But you could be aided by the auditor when spending with some interaction. Yeah, I guess you could do it. I'd be curious to hear maybe offline about the implications of this. Yeah. And the second, more accountability mechanisms, I guess it would be nice to have receiving limits. It was very efficient to implement spending limits. Receiving limits appeared a bit trickier, but I think we made some progress with that too. Because sometimes having unlimited receiving power is not good either. Think of ransomware. You do want to limit the amount an attacker receives anonymously as well for ransomware, right? And there is some work that investigates receiving limits. Platypus, if you want to look it up, they use zkSNARKs, however. And there's probably a million things that can be done there. In my mind, the idea is to do something simple that is reasonable and easy to understand for everybody and offers a good trade-off between privacy and accountability.
Thanks.
Thank you. So one question from this side.
Yeah. This one is on thresholding. So we were talking about signing using a thresholding scheme where we are going to split the signature into a number of shares so that at least the minimum number of people is at least T, right? Now, how are you implementing these? Are you using, for example, Shamir's scheme, or are you using some information theoretic secure schemes? Or
yes, we are using Shamir secret sharing. So you're talking about this picture right here. Yeah, we're using Shamir secret sharing. Just any linear secret sharing scheme will work in general, but yes, we're using Shamir. And the work done by Sonino et al. Here helps us use any linear secret sharing scheme to do threshold Pointcheval. And it was quite cool for us when we discovered this paper because we initially thought Pointcheval standards does not admit an efficient threshold signing protocol. We thought it was like Schnorr where you need to do a DKG per signature, but it turns out that you can, and we're leveraging that result. Yeah.
Thank you. Next question.
So I think you said for unlinkable signatures that you're using some aspect of like the Peterson commitment properties.
Yeah.
And in a different project, I've been trying to learn about BBS plus signatures, which are sometimes used for unlinkability. How do you what features do you see those providing and like trade-offs? Because I have no idea. I'm just trying to learn.
I don't know. There's BBS. There's BBS plus. I always forget the differences. And I think you could use BBS. So BBS is one of these schemes that admits efficient zero-knowledge protocol. So you could probably use that too. I don't know if they're re-randomizable.
I've never seen that word before, so maybe that's the trade-off.
And you don't need a re-randomizable signature. It's just for some reason I love the aesthetic appeal of getting a commitment, a signature, and then tumbling it down, turning it into something completely indistinguishable, and then doing a Sigma protocol on it to spend it. It's just very, very appealing to me. It's very simple. But you could use any signature scheme with a zero-knowledge friendly a feature where you could do a proof of knowledge of a signature on a commitment and open that commitment. And I believe, I'd have to look back, I think BBS or one of those schemes worked with commitments. Dan can confirm or deny. Yeah. But there's other signatures, like there's CL, there's BBS, there's other signatures you can use. We just loved Poincheval-Sanders. Yeah.
Thank you.
Next question.
Hello, my question is regarding certain compliance requirements. So suppose I only want to receive funds from certain trusted parties and not from everybody. Is that possible within the system? I'm assuming the registration authority can definitely do something about that, but
What are you assuming? Sorry?
the registration authority in the system, I think that would certainly be a good place to do that, but I was wondering what you thought about that.
So if you want to limit who you receive funds from, that'll, everything's possible. Cryptography is magical. Anything that you think is impossible, you can probably do it with cryptography as a rule of thumb. But if you wanted to limit who sends you coins, you would need a way for the ledger, for the blockchain validators to deny list senders for you. So you would need some sort of a deny list associated with your identity, and then each sender would need to prove non-membership of their identity in this deny list associated with your identity, but that's kind of tricky, because when the validators look up your identity, they learn who you are to get the deny list. So off the top of my head, I can't think of an efficient way of doing it, but I'm sure we can work something maybe. We can talk offline.
Okay, thanks.
So one last question.
I actually had two, but I'll see what I can do. One is on the null list you're talking about. That during verification, you want to make sure that you have this nullifier list and nullif is not in the nullifier list. So how do you manage this list? So this will have to be shared between the prover and the verifier. How is that shared? Is it passed on the blockchain?
Oh, the nullifier list is the blockchain.
Okay.
Yeah. So Zcash, for example, has a nullifier list.
Okay. Yeah. And you had mentioned one more thing towards the end of the presentation, wherein you want to find out about this coin going from one person to another person to another person, and you want to have a list of people. What happens, have we thought about what happens if the list of people becomes unusually large, and how are you going to manage maintaining such a list in this case?
Not sure I follow the question. So transferring a coin from Alice to Bob, Bob to Carl, Carl to Dan,
Yes.
it doesn't matter. You have a coin, you nullify it. Bob gets a new coin minted by the ledger. It's a new coin with a new signature,
Okay.
right? That gets nullified when Bob spends it. So each transaction appends one coin to the nullifier.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. So let's thank Alain one more time. Thank you.
Thank you, Madi.
Now next